I'd like to first start off with a round of applause for you, Han, and the Go Company for hosting us. This is one of the most amazing spaces I've ever presented in. So thank you so much for hosting us tonight. Okay, so as Steph told you, there's 4 of us presenting tonight. Each of us is going to present for about 8 minutes, give or take, and then after that we'll open it up for questions. And we're really excited about our chance to be here tonight. And I really want to thank all of you for coming, so thanks so much. So the 4 of us in this panel have all worked together. We are all UX designers at various stages in our career. And we worked on problems that had to do with single sign-on technology, typically in the healthcare space. And as we were doing our work, we would engage deeply in the content. Let me see if we were having trouble getting the TV working earlier. It looks like it's working. We would engage deeply in the topics that we were involved in, learning about technology, learning about our users, the kinds of things that UX people usually do. But as we were trying to get our heads around these problems, sometimes we're working on problems that people have literally been working on for years. And we found that we got our best results and some of our more creative results after we had conversations about fun and interesting topics that were not directly related to work. We did this organically. We didn't have a mind-wandering section of our meetings or something like that. We just happened to be people who have really diverse interests and would just bring things up because we were interested in them and other people would join in. And this was supported by our manager, Michelle, who would often do similar things in our meetings. You'll get to meet Michelle in a few minutes. We discovered that this gave us the freedom to think more freely and more openly. And rather than wasting time, these discussions opened up our minds to much wider possibilities than just the everyday work. Now, what I'm talking about is not this kind of thing. This image, which is stock photography of UX designers, makes my blood pressure go up. And if you look closely, you'll see they all have $400 Mont Blanc pens. I'm sure you all have one too. And I hope you wear a tie when you go to work. No, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking more like this. This is the atmosphere that I think we want to strive for. You're hanging out, you're with friends, you're relaxed. It's like you're in a coffee shop just talking to one another. It could be at work, it could be wherever. But you're engaged. It's not that you're checked out. You are engaged, but you're relaxed, and that relaxation makes it easier for this kind of free thinking to happen. So for one example, we're working on this very complex flow that people have been working on for quite a while. It had to do with, it was a single sign-on service we're working on, and it was cloud-based. And the problem was, what happens if the cloud goes down? Now, this was completely beyond our control. It was an outsourced service, but as everybody knows, it's possible for the cloud to go down. And this is the nightmare scenario for our clients because it meant that they couldn't log in to their healthcare systems. In many cases, they are using these healthcare systems on a minute-by-minute basis to manage their patients. So not getting access to these healthcare systems was a really important problem. Well, we used the methods that we're going to describe tonight. We had a bunch of meetings, and we were able to come up with some breakthrough solutions. Now, we couldn't solve that the cloud was going down. That was beyond our control. But we came up with solutions that made the UX team happy, that we felt would be a user experience, and that the engineering team felt that they could actually build. So the point is, we do think these methods really work. And this brings us to the topic of the flaneur. A flaneur is a French term for a person who wanders the streets without an agenda, detached but observant. Writers such as Baudelaire and Walter Benjamin wrote about the flaneur. The flaneur was a 19th century rebellion against the increasingly cold and mechanistic society of the 19th century. But I think that's something we can all relate to today. The flaneur finds poetic experience in their wanderings, often through seemingly mundane and ordinary city experiences. Edmund White wrote a wonderful book called The Flaneur, and in his book, he describes walking through the streets of Paris looking at seemingly ordinary situations. And from these seemingly ordinary situations, he infers all kinds of amazing cultural inferences. And again, it had a lot to do with the mental mindset of being relaxed and not having an agenda as he wandered. And to me, this is a lot like what UX people need to do and what we often do. I just don't know how often we consciously think about it. We are amassing all kinds of information about our users, about our business opportunities, about the technology. We have all this data. It's very much like wandering through the city. And my point is to have a frame of reference, a frame of mind that is one that is just open to what's happening, a little bit detached, a little bit relaxed, puts you in a place where this data can start really sinking in and where you can make inferences that are much deeper and more creative than you would if you were in this kind of work sort of mentality. Stephen Johnson wrote a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And in that book, he talks about a mathematician named Henri Poincaré, and that's who you're seeing. Henri Poincaré is here. Henri Poincaré was like one of the giant mathematicians of his generation. And he was working on some very complex problems. And at various times when he was working on these problems, he would come to a stumbling block where he just couldn't get past, what he needed to do next to solve, that part of the mathematical problem. And so what he would do is he'd get up and he'd go for a walk. And when he was out for the walk, not saying the entire solution came to him, but things started to shake loose, and he started to get ideas about how to solve the problem. One of the points Stephen Johnson, the author of the book, makes is that this would have only been possible because Poincaré was already an expert, and he'd already spent a lot of time immersed in the problem. And what I'd like to say is that we are all experts as well. Some of you might not be comfortable with that title, but you are. You're experts in user experience and the various other disciplines that you work, and you have put in that work to get that stuff into your head. But getting it to be free enough that you can get to the insights that you really need requires this flaneur mindset that I'm talking about. There's scientific research to support what we're talking about. And one thing you might do if you're interested is Google the term, quote, research on mind wandering and creativity. Believe it or not, you'll actually find scientific papers with the words mind wandering in them. And people have been studying this problem for quite some time. And like all scientific efforts, there's some debate and some back and forth, but there's strong evidence that shows that mind wandering at the right time leads to more creative outcomes than people who don't do that. So if you need a scientific basis to justify this, it's honestly there. Now, here's some photographs of a brainstorming session. I'm sure we're all familiar with brainstorming sessions. As you know, the idea of these is to generate lots of ideas and also to lower inhibition so that people are free to just express whatever they're thinking. We are all fans of brainstorming sessions. We think they're good. The problem with brainstorming sessions is that it takes a lot of time to organize them. They're typically like once every few months, a couple times a year, something like that. There's not enough there to sustain ourselves and keep those ideas flowing. And so our thought is that in addition to brainstorming, we need to have this mind-wandering stuff that we're talking about as part of our toolkit. And it's easy to do. Just bring up some non-work-related topic that's fun and interesting for people to talk about. We talked about such things as virtual ping pong. And I'm looking at a person in the audience who remembers that topic. We talked about poetry. We talked about architecture. We talked about our kids, about what we did on the weekend. The point is it needs to be something that's kind of low stress, but also interesting. You don't have to be a master of conversation, but it's something that if you find it interesting, good chances are other people will too. It's especially good to do this at the beginning of a meeting because then it kind of sets the atmosphere for the rest of it. But it can be done at any time, and it's a really good thing to do if you sense that everybody's just kind of weary and needs a little perk-me-up. Okay. So we need mind-wandering for our creative souls. We propose that being a flaneur of ideas, a fan of micro-brainstorms, is a much better way to work, to create, to keep our productivity high our creativity high, and our happiness high as well. And rather than feeling guilty about letting our minds wander, we should celebrate that this is actually how our minds work. And the more we make use of the natural ability, the better off we will be. And letting the mind go whenever it needs to is a good thing to do. And by the way, that's fairly often. With that, I'd like to introduce Vanita. Vanita Verma began her professional career as an architect, designing marketplaces in a busy city place where her stakeholders included politicians, business people, shoppers, and everyday city strollers. And from there, Vanita moved to the United States, where at Bentley College she received her master's degree in human factors. And today she's a product designer at Imprivata, where she works on complex medical applications for mobile devices. And due to the mechanics of this, Vanita and I are going to change seats.
So thank you, Matt. That you set us a great context for our talk. So before I dive into my topic, I would like to start with a little personal anecdote to what Matt already touched upon. So Matt and I were working as partner designers. So we would essentially work on the same problems. So we would meet like the product manager, understand what's the problem. We would both attend brainstorming sessions with the engineers, try to understand the problem, and then a lot of times both of us would meet together to work on like a joint session. But before we would dive into the problem itself, we would just chit-chat lightly to the point that Matt mentioned. So Matt has a very interesting background, which is in art, and he would tell me about, Vanita, have you heard about this artist, say, Mark Rothko? And I'd be like, no, I don't know about him. And I would ask some questions, and then because I've studied architecture, so I would relate it to something I knew. And we both went on with this yes and do you know this stuff, and this, we would just kind of connect ideas, just talk about here and there. Sometimes we would talk about the last movie we watched we really liked, so we would discuss like the storytelling technique, and sometimes we would talk about the book we were reading, literature, and sometimes philosophy. So that's exactly what I want to talk about today, is philosophy. And as we talk about what helps you or me get into that creative state, for me, that's philosophy. And I would like to dive more into that today. So, why philosophy? I personally feel that philosophy is something that works for me. And what is philosophy? So it is the study of like asking very fundamental questions about human existence, like why do we have this life? What am I doing here? What is knowledge all about? And what are values? Like in our day-to-day life, like from children we grow into adults, we have like value systems, but have we ever questioned it? It's like why we've been told to do what we're doing. And I feel that philosophy does that a lot. So personally, I really like it for those reasons. And at its core, philosophy is essentially about thinking very deeply and critically, just to better understand our own selves and the world around us. And I feel that philosophy is something that helps me get into the creative mindset, and let me tell you why. So, give me 1 second. So, I feel that for 2 reasons, philosophy is something that I find interesting. First is that it really helps me to challenge all the assumptions that I already have. So say that in a story, the author is talking about like the protagonist, and he's just questioning a lot of things. So I see that and bring that into my UX design. If I'm working on a design problem, I try to see it from all the other angles. Like, have I questioned the existing premises? Have I questioned all the assumptions? That's the first thing. So I feel that challenging all those things is something that I can relate and bring back to my design. And the second thing is philosophy is a lot about just understanding the human psyche, like why we do what we do, what are we trying to do. So it is a lot about just like nurturing the empathy. We all have it, but reading about it, kind of like I'm able to see that someone else is doing it, learn from it, and bring it back. And I feel that as I'm running my user research sessions, I try to bring some of that understanding there, like just watch and learn, when the user is talking or explaining the problem or the context, it might be a little different. So do have the patience to just give them that extra time or that understanding there. So moving on, today I would like to pick the example of just one philosopher and just dive a little bit into it, so as to see, like, today I've picked the example of Marcel Proust and what he can teach us about this process of creative reawakening. So to tell you a little bit about who is Proust. So Proust is a French philosopher. He wrote a lot of I would say literature. He contributed to the world of literature in late 1800s and early 1900s. He wrote, this is the picture of one of his very famous, his big works, which is a book called In the Search of Lost Time. It's about 3,000 pages long, so don't worry, I'm not going to dive into that, but I'm just going to give you the very quick gist of what he spoke about. So Proust calls this something, he calls them Proustian moments. He's named it after his own name. So he's telling this one story in this book called In the Search of Lost Time, and it's about this person. He's like the hero in his book, and he's feeling very dull. So he belongs to like a bourgeois household. He's well educated, well read, has all the, adequate supplies for everything, and he's trying to write something, but he's lost all the enthusiasm, nothing to inspire him, and he feels very dull, like his life is coming to an end, he's not enjoying anything. And at that time, Proust says that this author's mother is coming in, and she's coming with just tea and some Madeleine cake. So at first, this person says, "No, I'm not really interested," but then he decides to have it. So he sips through the tea and the fragrance of the tea, and as he bites into the cake, really brings back all the memories of his childhood and his favorite aunt, Leonie. When he used to visit her in the French countryside during his holidays, she used to come in and wake him up on a Sunday morning with this tea, and very similar tea and the cake. So this cake tastes exactly like that, and suddenly his memories refresh, and he's very excited, and he's remembering all those beautiful experiences he had, like he used to walk through the forest, so he used to look at the trees, the beautiful flowers, and then go to the beach and play with the pebbles and so. So he really says that, it's not that we don't have those memories, or we don't have that, exciting moments in our memories, but we have forgotten how to look at it. And he says that it's kind of like we are worn down by our daily and mundane tasks, and then we forget all these things which made us excited. But after he had this small experience, he's suddenly very excited and is looking at everything, the same objects in his house, but with excitement and inspiration now. And this is what he calls as Proustian moments. And I thought that, bringing this example is very apt, because for all of us, I'm sure most of us work in a corporate environment, our days are packed with these meetings, one after the other. And after that, you're told to, be creative. It's like, how do I be creative? I've lost my enthusiasm. So it's just can we have those small moments, like these Proustian moments? Maybe it's very unique to all of us. So moving on, Proust says that it's not life that's boring, it's just our lens that is very, very dull. So he says that essentially it's this habit which makes us very numb to our everyday beauty, and he gives the example of children. They don't suffer from habits, so they get very excited by seeing a small puddle, or they want to just jump on a bed, or they, maybe you are baking bread or cake in the house, they get very excited with those smells. But as adults, we seek very strong stimulants. We want fame or novelty, and only that can make us happy. So Proust says that there's one group of population who does this task of stripping away from all the habit very, very well, and those are artists. And why? So he says that, artists really have this ability to, even as an adult, they're able to strip away all the habit and bring all that appreciation of how a child has, but in their adulthood. And he says that artists have the power to open eyes just because of the way they're perceiving the surroundings. For example, in this image, this is just a still life of ordinary objects by Chardin, but the amount of attention he's paying to, how much light is falling on the edge of the spoon, what is the color of the apples like and how the glass is reflecting, or if an artist was painting an old man, they're able to show the little details of his skin and how his skin is still pink and it's reflecting. So it's like artists have the ability to kind of capture that beauty. So the takeaways from Proust are that when we are tapping back into our memories, the experiences we've already had. So it's not just a recollection of what already happened. So it's, say, like if an artist is painting a spring scene, it's not just a direct replica of what is the spring like, but what are the elements which made it memorable. Those kind of little details, those are the ones which bring back our enthusiasm. So Proust says that it's not that we are devoid of such memories, but we just forget those details when we are doing our mundane tasks or in our day-to-day habit. So he says that art and literature really helps us appreciate all those things rather than just remembering them as like recollection. So moving on, I'd like to now wrap up and just quickly sum up with what Proust is trying to tell us is that maybe we need to find our own Proustian moments. Like for me, just reading a little bit about philosophy helps me get into that creative mindset. For example, like when I'm on my work desk, I have all my screens set up, but I also keep the book which I was reading. And some days I'm like in meeting from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. straight, one after the other. And after that, I'm like, okay, now I need to do a work on my design problem. But I'm like so drained by then. And what do? So I just flip a page or two and kind of get energized. And I'm like, okay, back on. Let's start where I was doing. So maybe it's something different for everyone else. Maybe you like taking a walk, getting a coffee, or staring at cloud patterns or something. So we need to maybe find that, because trying to connect to what Matt already said, that like the big brainstorm sessions happen like once in 6 months. So it's difficult to look forward to, that will be my refreshing moment. So can we find our own smaller moments? And from now on, I would like to now hand it to the next speaker, who is Sasha. Sasha has a background in computer science and graphic design, and has been designing in the past about e-commerce and now working on healthcare solutions. She's originally from Ukraine and later moved into the United States, and she's passionate about mentoring new designers and continuously learning herself to create impactful user experiences. So I'll give you the spot.
Thank you, Vanita. Thank you for coming here. So just as Vanita mentioned earlier, we all like to chat with our co-workers from time to time, informally. And during one of those friendly conversations with Matt, I mentioned my struggles with ambiguity and how it affects my design process. And Matt shared his experience on that topic, and he told me that I'm not all alone in this boat, and he actually encouraged me to explore my thoughts and ideas on ambiguity. And I actually planned to make a LinkedIn post with my thoughts and ideas, but here I am, here with you now, lucky enough to share them right now. And let's start with my first idea, is that when I first started out as a UX designer, I thought that good design comes from clarity, from clear requirements, and linear process. And honestly, that's how things looked at the time, because at my previous roles, I had the luxury of working with business analysts, and they were the ones who translated all the chaos. They distilled stakeholder feedback, they cleared out all of the requirements, and they gave me clear problems to solve. There was always a wireframe, a Jira ticket, or a document, something that really felt like a clear starting point. So when I was interviewed for my current role, I was asked if I am comfortable working with a high level of ambiguity, and I said yes, I wanted the job, so I agreed with that. But the truth is, I had no idea what that really meant, and a few months in, I quickly understood that there are weight goals, conflicting inputs, moving targets. There were days when I wasn't even sure what kind of problem we are trying to solve. And I kept asking myself, like, how am I supposed to design anything if nothing is fully defined? I thought I was failing, but it turns out I was just entering the real world of design. So back then, I saw ambiguity as a sign that something had gone wrong. I really wanted to push through it and get to clarity as soon as possible and start designing. But with time, I've come to realize that ambiguity isn't always a problem to solve. It's a space to work within. There's the kind of ambiguity that sparks creativity, like an open-ended question or a loosely framed opportunity. That kind actually invites creativity and collaboration, and it creates room for better insights. And there's also the kind that blocks momentum, like unclear ownership or lack of context. And I can say that now I've learned to tell the difference, and I've learned that our role as designers is to actually help turn both kinds into forward movement. And one of the most uncomfortable lessons that I had to learn, especially during the transition from junior to mid-level designer, is that it's okay to not know. Back then, I felt pressure to show confidence during stakeholder meetings, to be decisive in workshops, and to present the solution. But the truth is when you are deep in a complex and shifting problem space, there are no perfect answers, at least not right away. So I had to learn to say things like, I'm not sure yet, but here's what I'm thinking, or let's test this and see what we find. And honestly, that kind of vulnerability felt terrifying at first, but with time, I saw how it built trust with engineers, with teammates, with product managers, and it opened the door for more honest conversations and better outcomes. So now I can say that I've come to see vulnerability as one of the most underrated skills in UX, especially when you're designing through ambiguity. And of course, as junior designer, I feared making mistakes. I thought that one wrong decision would erode trust or just completely break the process. So I overthought things, I held back ideas, and I waited too long for the right moment. But the truth is, ambiguity doesn't reward hesitation, it rewards momentum. So now I know that part of the job is making small bets, testing assumptions, trying things and adjusting. And it doesn't mean being careless, but it means being intentional, even in uncertainty. One of my favorite lessons that I've learned, especially after stepping out to more responsibility, is that we are not only designing for users, we are also designing, creating understanding for our teams. Because as product designers, we often sit at the intersection of business goals, technical restrictions, and user needs. And the space between those things, that's where ambiguity lives. And we are often the ones tasked with making it legible. And it's really hard, and it doesn't mean oversimplifying things, but it means doing the hard work of mapping out what's known and unknown, and as we all know, it means asking better questions and prototyping to learn and not just to show. It means creating clarity and not just consuming it. So, to sum up what I've just said, I just would like to say once again that ambiguity used to scare me a lot, but I've come to realize that it's just part of the job, and more than that, it's what makes the job meaningful. So if you're early in your design career and if you feel like ambiguity is overwhelming, know that you're not alone. Just start where you are, share your thoughts, take the first step, because good design doesn't come from certainty, it comes from the courage to explore the unknown. And with that, I'd like to wrap up and introduce you to Michelle. Michelle is the next speaker. Michelle is a UX professional with over 25 years of experience. She spent the first decade of her career in small startups, teaching herself the fundamentals of human-centric design for web-based products. Michelle went on to solve user problems for multiple facets of healthcare at companies such as Athena Health, IQVIA, and Imprivata.
Thank you, Sasha. Oftentimes, how we manage ambiguity can feel like a dirty little secret, and I really appreciate your honest and eloquent expression of your experience with it. And I was the person who asked her about ambiguity in that interview, so yeah, thank you. When the pandemic and subsequent lockdown hit in 2020, I was only 6 months into my job as head of product design at Imprivata. I was faced with not only figuring out how to build relationships across this new org for myself, but with how to lift up and support the morale of my own team. It was a period of profound trial and error in which 4 of my 10 team members left, all within a few months of each other. There were many reasons outside of my control as to why this happened, but it forced me to rethink about what was within my control so that I could create an environment in which practitioners can thrive within this extreme context of ever-changing priorities and a great deal of uncertainty, both inside and outside the bounds of making software. That's the yummy kind of turnover. As a UX leader, my job is to ensure that UX solutions at the appropriate level of scope and quality, of course, are delivered in a timely manner and with as little friction as possible, right? To do that, it's absolutely crucial to create a psychologically safe space that fosters that magical combination of independence and collaboration within a multidisciplinary team. Broadly speaking, a safe space is one where people feel supported to talk about things and do things without fear of being penalized. This is important because an environment of mistrust ultimately reduces the wiggle room for real creative problem solving. People simply become risk averse out of fear of making mistakes. So what are some ways in which we create a safe space for UX practitioners to thrive? And then as an IC, when you're in that solitary moment where it's just you and the pixels, what kinds of things around you can support your ability to let your mind wander? I'll share just a few highlights of things that worked for our team at the time, and I'll be speaking about my experience as a UX leader, but everything I'm about to share is yours for the taking, whether you're an IC or a manager, because I hope, as everyone knows, leadership isn't confined to job titles or number of reports. As I rebuilt the team, I had to make some very intentional choices around hiring and team makeup, daily UX practice, and how we functioned as a discipline within the larger product development group. My first goal was to hire the right people by being thoughtful about balancing experiences, skill sets, and working styles. Our hiring process had clear documented steps with criteria, defined roles, sample questions, and most importantly, the whole team was engaged at one point or another throughout the whole process. Above all, we understood that having a foundation of curious, open people is the key to building a safe space for the whole team. This was observed by Allison Reynolds and David Lewis when they were studying high-performing teams, and has proven to be true through our own experiences together. So whether we are joining an existing team or building a new one, it's our responsibility as managers to get to know people as individuals and to create opportunities to foster relationships within it. Everyone works differently, right? And every team needs different things. So one very simple place to start is with how you use your team meeting time. We collaborated on agenda items for both standing meetings and special off-site gatherings. Because if you, and this is something I learned after the first off-site that we did together as a new team, if you as the manager is doing all of the talking during these sessions, you're missing out on a huge opportunity to engage your team and help them build those critical thinking muscles. Another way we fostered relationships was through a Design Buddies program. This was an intentional matching of people with complementary experiences, skills, and working styles across different products. Now, I did the matching, but it was really up to each pair to decide on how to use that time, whether it was casual one-on-ones, half-hour one-on-ones, weekly ones, whatever, or collaborative working sessions, or coffee, or mutual design feedback. It was up to them. So my last example is about informal design sharing. This was in the form of a visual stand-up. You can think of a typical Scrum stand-up with a twist. Each week, half the team took turns doing a brief overview with a few images on one project they were working on. And this provided cross-product visibility into projects and other areas, and would often lead to larger philosophical discussions within the team, and sometimes smaller group work sessions. As an added benefit, this reinforced the idea that design and research is a process, and that being productive can mean many other things other than a completed wireframe spec. Let's bust that myth. These are just a few examples of team activities. I'd like to talk about just 2 lessons learned from my time at Imprivata. Our fundamental challenge as managers is to help our team strike balance between the reality of producing timely deliverables and having a reasonable amount of time in which to do that work. To do that, we must be clear about our expectations and know when to step in and when to step back. At Imprivata, the UX team was charged with developing a strategy for how we might go about harmonizing the look and feel for 9 different products with different code bases. We focused on the 2 most visible areas for the users, the login pattern, if you know Imprivata, like that is us. That was when I was there, and the main navigation bar. We had an aggressive timeline, but because we had already been exploring new standards for patterns in the event that this someday might happen, and because we had already started incorporating our new branding into our new standards, We didn't need to ideate from scratch. We already had a great foundation. Now, this timeline made some designers uncomfortable, as many of the people in this room can attest to, but by breaking down the project into pieces and establishing small working groups with captains, so one person who was responsible for corralling that group, we were able to successfully meet this challenge with solutions that were well received by our stakeholders. It would have been much harder if I hadn't done the hard thing and stepped in with a very prescriptive plan. So communicating clear boundaries and expectations are vital to establishing trust within your team. This is one of my absolute mantras: clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And sometimes it's very uncomfortable, but it's our responsibility to sit with that discomfort and do the thing that's best for the team. The second lesson relates to openness. The vulnerability that Sasha talked about needs to go both ways. And we all need to practice Proust's ideas around breaking habits to unlock creative thinking. I took a break from tech when the bubble burst the first time in 2020 to get my MFA in painting. And one of the first things that my professors drilled into my head was we had to drop everything we thought we knew about the process of making art. We had to intentionally practice with curiosity. So no matter how much experience we have, none of us has all the answers. But the experience we gain provides us with a toolbox of things to try to help us get to the next place we need to be. We must all model our willingness to be vulnerable and to experiment, regardless of whether we're ICs or managers. So these are some experiments that we and many folks in this room tried so that our team could feel supported within a safe and reasonable set of boundaries. The reality is we're all working within constraints, but through experience, we develop better judgment for when to let our minds wander or when to quickly make that wireframe your product team needs in order to make progress. It's the job of our leaders to guide us in that journey. And that can be done by collaboratively building a psychologically safe space in which everyone can do their best work. So thank you for listening. We would love to open it up to any questions or comments or your own experiences about what nourishes your creative soul in an environment where there are naturally a lot of